Welcome to China Forum, the leading educational television program on current trends and developments in Chinese politics, economics, and society. Today we are presenting a special episode on U.S.-China cooperation during World War II. The current state of U.S.-China relations has fallen far from World War II levels of cooperation, and today recurrent bouts of tension plague relations. Given the complex security environment in China's neighborhood, it's important for Americans and Chinese to remember that cooperation between the two countries is very possible, and less than a century ago, the two were allies from 1941 to 1945. Americans and Chinese fought side by side and incurred mutual sacrifices to end World War II and the Japanese occupation of East Asia. The following recovered documentary footage depicts US-Sino cooperation in World War II and the important visit by one of China's most famous diplomats, Madam Chiang Kai-shek, to the U.S. to build morale and goodwill between the countries in 1943. As we celebrate the 35th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China, China Forum is airing this footage as a reminder of the importance of cooperation between the U.S. and China for peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific.
The enemy, to his sorrow, learned all about the abilities of the Chinese-American composite wing, how it crippled his supply lines throughout China and on the China Sea, how it blasted the docks and warehouses that fed his war machine. Mission accomplished. Back at the base, inspection yet united. Its new leader was his disciple and lieutenant, Chiang Kai-shek, a soldier and statesman well aware of Japanese ambitions and of the urgent need to build up unity and strength for the inevitable crisis. The government stimulated the development of natural resources, hitherto almost untouched. Introduced modern machines and methods into the factories. Began the building of a network of railroads. Improved the important inland waterways. Then strung thousands of miles of highways into the interior. The giant of Asia was gathering strength. So Japan advanced its timetable of conquest. In 1931, the new order came to exploit Manchuria. The world was shocked. China protested. But Japan defied the world. In 1932, they bombed and shelled Shanghai. Aware of the mounting menace of Japan, Chiang Kai-shek worked desperately to build a national army backed by the unified spirit of all China. But before he could complete his program, on July the 7th, 1937, at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beiping, Japan struck. Three and 1/2 million helpless people in an undefended city made ideal targets. This was the lesson. The new barbarism in action. Terrified Chinese sought the safety of the international settlement, but the Japanese were not ready to bomb the people and property of the Western powers. Not just yet. But there was space for only a comparative few. The gates were closed. The rest of the millions of Shanghai were left helpless victims of the bomb. There was no desperate hour the Chinese people came together in a unity they had never known. Enough. Lacking the weapons for modern war, the leaders of China devised an innovation in military grand strategy, the trading of space for time. Time to train and equip armies, time to move their industries into the interior, time for the civilized world to awaken to this vast plot against mankind. And out of the cities and towns streamed the people. Far beyond the mountain barrier, in the ancient city of Chongqing, the Chinese set up the temporary capital of their republic. In the hillsides, they carved great caves and built a city underground. There, from 1938 to 1941, the enemy poured death and destruction on the capital. This was the scourge of Chongqing. But there was no more thought of surrender here than there was in London or in Stalingrad. For all of the people of China knew, as the fighting French and the Yugoslav partisan and the Greek patriot knew, that this was a people's war, their war. Chiang Kai-shek directed the overall strategy of the regular army. His forces were large in number, but supplies were difficult to obtain in a world feverishly arming against the menace of German militarism. Chiang Kai-shek knew that the weapons he needed could only come from abroad. Early in the war, in 1938, he had foreseen the danger of blockade and planned a new supply line from the sea. In Burma, a railroad ran from the seaport of Rangoon northward to Lashio. Between Kunming, the gateway to Chongqing, and Lashio, stretched a wilderness of malarial swamp, mountains, rivers, and jungles. Engineers had assured the Chinese that it would be impossible to build a road through this wilderness within 6 years, even with modern machinery. Impossible. But China couldn't wait 6 years. So with only the most primitive tools, 400,000 men, women, and children tackled the impossible. Beset by landslide, plague, and flood, they labored. They died by the uncounted thousands. But in less than 2 years, they had built 300 bridges and laid a highway 700 miles long down the face of Asia. China had its lifeline, the Burma Road. But after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese air forces, fresh from their triumphs in Malaya and the South Pacific, came to blast the Burma Road out of existence and thus assure the land blockade of China. But the Flying Tigers were ready for them. These were the boys of the American Volunteer Group brought from America many months before Pearl Harbor to protect Lend-Lease to China. Their commander, Claire Chennault, was chief advisor on military aviation to Chiang Kai-shek. Flying Tigers never lost a battle. They destroyed 500 enemy planes. Military leaders agreed that a well-trained and well-equipped land army might also be needed to drive the Japs out of China. And in 1944, General Stilwell outfitted 3 Chinese divisions in Burma with American equipment. They learned the latest techniques of war through interpreters. And it wasn't long before these new comrades in arms understood each other. Stilwell led his men into battle for the first task to clear the Japanese from northern Burma and stop the invasion threat to South China.
Nor could China have sent a better goodwill ambassador. Here in San Francisco's Chinatown, the largest and proudest Chinese community in America, tens of thousands crowd the streets to welcome the First Lady of China. In Los Angeles, the entire city extends a fervent welcome to the distinguished visitor. And through her, as she broadcasts from the famed Hollywood Bowl, 130 million Americans hear and understand China's 450 millions.
I shall not encumber you.
In ringing words, she describes Nanking and, we quote, the energy, persistence, and patriotism of the refugees who gave their time and labor without stint and without murmur, asking in return no remuneration, no manifest recognition of their services. En route across the continent, Madame Chiang stops to inspect Navy and Marine units of the Women's Reserve Corps. In Chicago, America's second largest city and hub of the continent's grain belt, she tells another vast audience of China's war aims.
I stress again that
We in China, she says, are fighting to help build the mosaic of world civilization, the perpetuation of mankind's common and pledged principles, which cannot be subverted or surrendered. New York, most sophisticated and celebrity-wise of cities, sets a new high in welcomes. For like the rest of America, New York realizes Madame Chiang is no ordinary celebrity. The wife of one of the world's greatest military and political leaders, she is also a leader herself. And, as always, a sincere and touching welcome comes from Americans of Chinese descent. 25,000 New Yorkers jam Madison Square Garden to hear Madame Chiang. Her ringing plea for real cooperation between the United Nations is carried over the air to millions throughout the land. She says, and we quote, "Let us, the United Nations, which have come together by choice, resolve to create a world resting on the pillars of coexistence, cooperation, and mutual respect." Arriving at Washington, the capital of the United States, Madame Chiang is greeted by Mrs. Roosevelt. She drives off with President and Mrs. Roosevelt. With them, she visits some of the nation's most hallowed shrines, including Mount Vernon, where George Washington, first American president and the father of his country, lived and was buried. At Arlington National Cemetery, Madame Chiang honored America's unknown soldier. Most memorable of her speeches is that before both houses of Congress convened an extraordinary joint assembly in her honor.
It is my great pleasure, my high privilege, and my distinguished honor to present to you Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
I can assure you, she says, that China is eager and ready to cooperate with you and other peoples to lay a true and lasting foundation for a sane and progressive world society which would make it impossible for any arrogant or predatory neighbor to plunge future generations into another orgy of blood. We in China, like you, want a better world, not for ourselves alone, but for all mankind, and we must have it. And so, to the plaudits of one vast and influential assemblage after another, Madame Chiang's goodwill tour becomes a mounting triumph.
I am very happy that Madame Chiang spoke as she did of the friendship of our two countries. I feel that China, with its age-old civilization, can give to us the background of maturity that we need, and we perhaps can give to her some of the things that a young pioneering country should have, like extra energy, which we always seem to have, and a crusading spirit to carry through the new objectives of a better world for all mankind. I bring to you, the American people, the greetings of friendship from the Chinese people. Friendship, to us Chinese, is a sacred thing. And when we consider that for 160 years, America and China have been friends, I know you will feel, as I do, that we shall be friends always.
Thanks to Madame Chiang Kai-shek's lobbying efforts during her visit, the U.S. sent more C-46 aircraft to China and increased their total number of Air Force and service troops in the China-Burma-India theater by 500%. China's help in the war effort was essential to defeating the Japanese on mainland Asia, and the U.S. and China, along with their other allies, emerged victorious at the end of World War II in 1945. After China's Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang were forced to flee to Taiwan, but Madam Chiang Kai-shek will continue her diplomatic efforts to build U.S.-China relations as the First Lady of the re-established Republic of China. She passed away in 2003 at the age of 106 in New York. Her legacy is one of the close ties and history of cooperation that bind the U.S. and China. As the U.S. and China navigate recurrent periods of tense relations, remembering the sacrifices each country made to achieve the same goals during World War II could be beneficial for relations. A renewed attitude of cooperation between the U.S. and China would greatly benefit efforts towards maintaining peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific and keep conflict of the magnitude of World War II from returning to the region. To all of you at home, thank you for tuning in to this special episode. Please join me again next week on China Forum.